Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the fourth official episode of the Black Rose Gaming D&D Discussion. I'm the host and GM, Mikado. You can call me Mick. Let's go ahead and do a quick roll call before we get started. Balasar, are you there?
Yep.
Micah, are you there?
Yo,
Treva, are you there?
Oh,
You right? You kind of cut out there.
box.
Alright, so you're there. Okay. Now, the idea I had for this particular episode is to talk about character creation. As I'm sure we all know, that first time that you start playing a D&D game, it can be really, really difficult to try and figure out how to make a character, and it can seem kind of like you're being, really annoying if you start asking everybody else how to make a character. And it can still be complicated much later on, even. So, I think we should start with a simple explanation of what character creation means. For every kind of Dungeons and Dragons or role-playing game at all, even video games, there's always a set of stats. Always. It doesn't matter what they call them, there's usually a set of six. Some have fewer, some have more, depending on how they do things. But there's always a set of statistics or abilities, whatever they want to call them, and those abilities define what you can and cannot do as a character. It's supposed to give kind of an easy judge as to how powerful your character is, and it's really about that simple. As far as everything else with character creation, there's obviously skills that you get in a lot of games, there's feats or abilities and other things, but that's usually more dependent on the system. The first thing I want to talk about as far as this goes, though, is actual dice rolling. Because when I had first joined a D&D group, the system we were doing was Star Wars, and they basically handed me a set of dice and gave me a character sheet and said to make up my stats, and I had no idea what the hell I was doing. And it wasn't until like 20 minutes later that someone finally explained it to me. So, when you roll stats in most D&D systems, you roll 4d6, four six-sided dice, and you drop the lowest number, add the rest together. That's your ability. There's multiple different ways of deciding what goes where. Personally, I'm a fan of the idea of putting them where they fit most once they're done. How about the rest of you guys? Balasar? Okay.
I didn't.
Micah?
Sorry, I really didn't have that issue because it was pretty much the first time I ever played. I had a pre-made character to deal with.
I am going to talk about that in a minute, but that's a different issue. But what about the first time it came for you to actually start making a character where you actually had to, go ahead and do the whole dice roll thing and put it out? Which way do you prefer to do it? Do you prefer to do it by just you roll the dice, find a number, and just assign it down the list, and that's it? Or do you prefer to wait until you have them all and then assign them out based on how you want to build the character?
Yeah, I'd rather get all the numbers I roll for, and then assign them to the proper area for that class.
Right. Right. All right. How about you, Micah?
honestly, I've been more of a fan of the point buy system than actually rolling dice, where you just get a pool of points to spend and you can put them wherever you need them to be. But as for rolling dice, it's always good. It's always a good standby.
That's good. That's true. Oh, it looks like we have a new addition. Hi, Tabby. Are you there, Tabby? Okay, apparently not. What about you, Trevor? Which way do you prefer to just go down the list or to wait until you've got them all and then put them where you need them?
Me personally, I'm kind of impartial here because you can have a lot of fun either way. Like if you want to metagame it, like really think about what you're trying to do and make the best possible character. It's always better to roll everything out and then put stuff where you want it, so that way you can take advantage of like race bonuses and stuff like that. But if you're just trying to make a ridiculous character and have fun,
Your audio just cut out, Trevor. Are you there?
hello?
There you are. And yeah, I
Weird.
understand. I understand what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. There is, however, I think, depending on the kind of game you're trying to run as well, or trying to be a part of as a player as well. Something that I like to do, and that Animus knows I'm going to do again at some point, is run what I call a commoner campaign. It doesn't necessarily matter what system it's in, as long as commoner is a thing in it, or something like it. But like I always seem to bring up in this show, Game of Thrones specifically has a set of NPC classes to give you like a way of building an NPC in the traditional Game of Thrones system with the 20-sided dice and everything, instead of the Green Rona that has D6s only. One of the NPC classes is Commoner, and I mean, Commoner gets nothing. They get very little health, almost no skill points. They don't even start getting a base attack bonus, I think, until like level 4 or 5. It's the lowest possible thing you could be. And what I enjoyed greatly doing, and what I intend to do again, is a commoner campaign where everyone starts off as a commoner, and in order to make it more realistic, for lack of a better word, to being a commoner, in that particular case, the players are going to roll 3d6, and they're going to go down the line. You don't get to change them, you don't get to rearrange them. There's no point buy. Just that's it.
Dan, from the bottom of my heart.
Are you there, Trevor? You cut out.
The bottom of my, from the bottom of my heart, I hate you, Mick.
I know you do, Trevor. The feeling is mutual.
The poor commoner, easily filled by a house cat.
Usually they can be, yes, yes. Although I did play a commoner campaign in Game of Thrones that I greatly enjoyed. I became a noble lord and everything. It was awesome. It was awesome. It was fun. I died of old age. But
Is that when Mr. Black showed up?
that was House Black, yes. But as far as point buy, I don't have a lot of experience with doing that personally. Why don't you go ahead and give us an idea of how it works, Micah?
Well, the common example is the Old World of Darkness games, where you get so many points for your social merits, so many points for your physical merits, so many points for your mental merits, and you just divide up the points as you see fit. In D&D, you'd be given like a pool of, for better lack of a term, 40 points, and then you divide that 40 points into your strength, into your intelligence, into your dexterity, so on and so forth, until you get the character you like.
But is it a direct translation between points to the ability score? Like, if I wanted to have a strength of 18, would that cost 18 points, or would that cost more than that, or less?
It depends on your DM, really. Some DMs will do the flat 1-to-1 transfer, while others will have you scale up the higher you get, so that way you don't end up with a barbarian with 25 points of strength right off the bat.
There is also something to be said for the 5th edition habit of kind of capping player stats at 20, without, of course, counting racial modifiers. Racial modifiers can make it go up, and I think with the feat expansion, there's a way to make it go higher than that. I don't recall, though, but
it depends on what source book you're playing out of.
That's true. Let's see, what else?
I personally really dislike that rule. Like, it seems really odd to just limit yourself like that.
To limit yourself to being a commoner?
Well, that too. Like, I don't know why you guys would want to do that. I'm trying to escape my shit real world, okay?
Well, I mean, this technically is the kind of thing for a later episode, but to give you a brief understanding of what I mean, the idea of a commoner campaign is you start as a commoner, and the goal is to become something bigger than that. I mean, the commoner campaign I was in, one of us became a global merchant that was selling all kinds of crazy things across the narrow sea, and even got to sell things in a shy by the shadow. And another one of us ended up becoming, I don't remember what it was. She was like the consort to the king, and then eventually she assassinated him, but blamed it on somebody else, and so she became queen. And in a campaign after that, the character became the emperor of Westeros or some crazy shit. You're not required to stay a commoner. You only stay a commoner so long as you don't rise above your station.
The whole game, you're gonna love it.
I heard the last 2 seconds of that, maybe.
He said, I'm gonna stay a commoner the whole game. You're gonna love it. Being part of
Uh,
my turn will be washing the dishes, Dad.
yep, yep. Washing the dishes and mucking out the whorehouse. So,
Yeah.
also with character creation, something I've had trouble with myself in the past, and that I've met more than a few other people that have had trouble with it, is giving a character a name. Personally, the thing that I have trouble with is that I try to make sure the names I give to characters make sense in the lore of the world and still are a good name as far as I'm concerned. Have any of you guys ever had issues with that, Balasar?
No, not really.
Have you ever decided to just give yourself an off the wall name that doesn't make any sense in the setting you're in?
Only occasionally.
Alright. How about you, Micah?
Honestly, I've
Right.
never really had any problems with names at all. I do write as a hobby, so it just comes naturally. For example, right now I'm in an Oriental Adventures campaign where my barbarian, Gan the Proud Mountain, is happily going about his business.
Good stuff. Good stuff. What about you, Trevor?
I'm awful at coming up with names, and when I can't come up with one, in the meantime, I use a name from like some anime or something that I've watched. I think the most recent example is when a character in your
The
last Game of
story.
Thrones game
Yes, the
was named
story of the
Sasuke Graham.
Sasuke Graham, brother of the Night's Watch. Because that made so much sense.
Wants to kill the Shadow Cat with a Sharingan.
Can I be perfectly honest here?
Feel free. Honesty is
I kind
encouraged.
of stole Gan's name from a fighting game Capcom put out many moons ago, so I'm in that boat too.
I mean, as I've said before, it is written in every D&D book I've ever seen, and even a lot of like how-to books on writing and like dungeon mastering and all of this good stuff. It always says steal liberally from everything that you like. Go ahead and name your character fucking Batman if you're playing monsters and mutants or whatever you want. Just go ahead and do it. Whatever it takes, as long as you're having fun.
Or Dewan up on your face.
Or John Fist, who cares? Who knows?
There was always I played a game not too long ago with one of the people in our party. He's the one who got insta killed by the frost spider. He had a wonderful character named Naruto Uzumaki in an otherwise completely American game.
I mean, if the character was a neckbeard weeb, I could kind of see that.
I mean, he was a neckbeard weeb who like designed games, but he also like got derailed out of the story completely because he decided he had to go to work in the middle of us like invading Germany or some shit.
How American is that? That's good stuff. Alright, well, also, with character creation, something that can be difficult for people is trying to read a character sheet for the first time. And I think we've all been there before when you're still brand new to D&D and so nothing makes sense yet. And you go in there trying to figure out what's going on and they give you a sheet and it has a million different blank spaces and all kinds of just little what's the word? Just little abbreviations of things and it's very overwhelming. I'm actually going to bring up a couple sheets for the people at home who are watching. Let's see. Well, when you first ever look at a character sheet, here we go. Anyone on YouTube that's watching, you're going to see it right here. It's got the big games title right there. It says it's a character sheet. It has spaces for the character's name, alignment, the player name. Some of them even have things for what god you worship and everything else. It can be very difficult to look at this for the first time without being a player that's already knows what they're doing and figure it out from the start. I know I had that issue. What about you guys? Did you have any kind of trouble when you were first getting into it? Did someone hand you a character sheet? I know Tabby, whose microphone isn't working, I know she told us a story a while back about how when she first started playing D&D, she was playing vampire, and someone just handed her a filled out character sheet and said, "Here you go, here's some dice." How about
That's
you, Bellis?
crazy.
It's pretty bad, yeah. How about you, Belisar?
I didn't really have that issue. Lucky me.
Why did you not have that issue?
Because first attempt was a pre-made character that already had, the sheet was already filled out, and I had no issues of knowing why or how.
The question I have though is when someone just hands you a brand new character sheet and you're new to D&D, don't you feel a little bit overwhelmed with that of like, well, I mean, thanks for this piece of paper, but what does all this crap mean?
Well, if I ever had that kind of issue, I'd actually ask for the book or the guide or something, and a brief description or help.
It is always good to ask for help. What about you, Micah? Did you ever have that moment when you were still brand new back in the day?
With every system I've ever played, it's usually, okay, what does this mean? What does this mean? I don't even recognize this word. Let me look it up. No, heck with it. Just give me the book. I'll figure it out.
I could see that. It gets even more difficult with some systems because then they have layered systems within them that are on the character sheet, and it's peculiar and odd.
Well, my group doesn't speak of GURPS, so
Well, I was actually talking about Dune, which I haven't had a chance to play test with anybody yet because I'm still trying to figure out how damage works. I'm not actually certain.
Before just saying, GURPS is amazing. You should get into that.
I do also want to take a chance to try D20 periods, D20 future, D20 present, or D20 modern rather, D20 past, all that. It seems like fun. I think I could.
D20 Modern's a lot of fun. It doesn't have classes per se. It's just archetypes. The strength hero, the intelligence hero.
See, that's
all
kind of
that
my
fun
point.
stuff.
That's kind of my point. That's what I like about it. Is for those of you watching at home, when you play Dungeons and Dragons for the first time or the 50th time, you choose a race, and then you choose a class. You choose if you want to be a fighter, or if you want to be a rogue, or a bard, or a wizard, or whatever else you want to be, paladin, whatever it is. D20 Modern is a much more. It seems almost like it's a narrative system from what I've read, because it's not based around being a fighter or a rogue, or since D20 Modern takes place in modern day, it's not about being a gunslinger or a politician or a hacker or whatever else. It's about which one of the ability scores you most focus on. Do you most focus on charisma or wisdom or intelligence or strength or constitution? It sounds very fun. It can also be difficult, I find, going between different systems. Trying to go between different systems, and like you said, Micah, you've had that moment with every system you've played where someone hands you a character sheet and you look at it going, what the hell does any of this mean? Especially when there's systems that are similar to each other, but they still have a lot of things that are different. For instance, the people that are watching at home, or right now you can see my Pathfinder character sheet up, and right underneath the Fortitude, Reflex, and Will and the base attack bonus, there's a pair of boxes that say CMB and CMD. And unlike Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder has what's called a combat maneuver system. So if you wanted to do something acrobatic in the middle of combat, you want to jump and do a double flip over an enemy and then strike him from behind, you would roll a combat maneuver bonus check, I believe in addition to an attack roll. and the combat maneuver would go against their combat maneuver defense. You would have to get higher than their total, just like their AC. It's just a different AC to go against to make things a little more dramatic, which is always interesting. As far as continuing the talk of character creation, though, let's also talk about. Oh, shit. There. Let's also talk about Dungeons and Dragons itself for a bit. Between 4th edition and 5th edition, everything changed. And I think they've made it a lot better now, honestly. It's a lot simpler, which I like. Some of the changes, not so much, but character creation I found to be a lot easier this time around. How about you, Belisar?
Yeah, I find it a lot easier than the last few versions.
What about you, Micah? Have you played 5th edition at all?
I have not. My bookshelf consists of AD&D and 3.5, so most of my character creations for that system take 6 hours.
Well, character creation is a long process. I know that it usually takes the majority of a session the group I'm with right now at least, when we start making a brand new set of characters for everybody. I know you can attest to that, Belisar, and you too, Trevor.
Yes. That's because not everyone knows exactly what they're doing. Like me and you, for instance, can normally knock it out in about an hour, but everyone else, or some other people, I should say, takes upwards of 3 sometimes.
Yeah, that's for those of you at home, that's one very important thing to realize. Character creation should never be rushed. I mean, it's true what he says. Treva and I can generally get a new character for ourselves knocked out in about an hour, depending on the complexity of the system, but seriously, do not rush yourself when trying to make a character, because if you rush, you're gonna do something stupid. Like the first character that I ever made, and I ended up getting to level 12 with level 1 health because I just didn't know what the hell I was doing.
Constitution scores matter.
Well, they do matter, but I didn't realize I was supposed to upgrade my health every level.
Ooh, that one's gotta hurt.
Exactly. It's so toward the end, everybody else was running around with 200 plus HP, and I was running around with about 55, going, "What the hell is this?" But choosing a class. Admittedly, some systems don't even have them, but choosing a class, I always try. I usually try to find something different, but you really can't go wrong with the tried and true. Whatever character class you're most comfortable with playing that you know the best, it's fine to go ahead and use that. It really is. There's no reason not to.
Yeah.
However, that being said, there are a couple of important things for an actual party build. I know I know I've encountered people that refuse to be in a party that has more than one of any given character class. It can make sense to not have more than one, but I've known people that were kind of obnoxious about it, specifically when I was first intending to get into D&D long ago in the mists of time, 3.5 style. I wanted to be a high elf wizard because wizards are cool and they throw fireballs at shit, and that's awesome. And one of the other guys who apparently had already been playing D&D for a while said, "No, you can't do that. I'm already a wizard and we can't have more than one wizard in the party, so you can't do it. You're not allowed to." It's like, "Oh, okay, well, I mean, why can't we have two? Because we just can't. We just can't. It's not how you do things." Well,
Those are the kind of people you quickly cut out of your gaming circles because they're going to rules lawyer you to death.
oh, I know. And that never got anywhere as far as a campaign happening anyway, which is frankly just fine. But
So, to an
yes, Trevor?
I was gonna say, to an extent, I understand where that person is coming from, but not to the point where I'm gonna tell someone you can't play that. But I personally don't like to play a class that someone else is gonna play, especially like a caster, because then there can be a lot of overlap, and then you feel like you're not contributing as much as you could because there's someone else in the party who, for the most part, can do it just as well as you do. So then I like to try to find a different class that can do something similar, but not the same.
That also, I think, can come down to the matter of communication, because it is very important to communicate. And if you have, the point I was about to make next is, if you have two people that are playing a wizard, or even more so, if you have like two people, well, no, not more so, but if you have two people playing a caster, the same kind of caster, it is important to know what that person is going to be as far as that caster. It's important to know, hey, I'm a
They're gonna be like a
wizard.
blaster.
Right, I'm a wizard, and I'm going to focus on, throwing fireballs and lightning and magic missiles and everything. Okay, well, in that case, I'm going to focus on necromancy, and I'm just going to be raising up zombies so that we can throw a bunch of enemies at the enemies that are already fighting us. Communication, communication, communication. I'm probably going to end up saying that at some point in every episode because it is that important. You have to communicate with each other. Everyone has to be on the same page. Always important.
That's how my Sunday group does it. Before we even begin a new campaign, we figure out what everybody else is playing and try to balance out the party. The GM just fills in the spots that are missing.
Okay, that sounds like a good system.
The next thing I was going to talk about is kind of a not really a necessary, but a more or less safe system for how to have a party build. Every party should have someone that can pull aggro, which, to those watching, pulling aggro is just like the person that plays a tank in an MMO. They're the one that they don't hit especially hard necessarily, but they take a ton of damage before they go down, and they're the ones that can pull the attention of whatever boss or whatever big monster is in the group. Then you have the DPS, the damage per second characters. They do a lot of damage really fast. They might not be able to take that much of a hit, but they're good to have. And what I find to be one of the most important but also most overlooked characters, especially in D&D, is the support character. Not necessarily a healer, but it's always important to have someone who can heal people, but you need a support character. You need someone that can... You really do need a healer. Just it comes down to that. You need somebody that can at least throw that can throw a couple HP your way. Otherwise, you're going to end up in a party wipe a lot quicker and a lot easier. Yes, Micah?
And it's not just healing, too. You got to worry about your buffs and your debuffs as well. Your haste spells, your slow spells, your bless spells.
Sleep spells, Trevor?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There was a campaign that I played where I was a bard, and I was single-handedly clearing encounters because we tried out a different thing where, like, first-level spell slots came back every 3 rounds or so.
It wasn't just that, it was also that you were playing a pixie bard with a fairy dragon for a familiar, and a fairy dragon has both sleep and stun. You had both sleep and stun, and since they were both first level spells, they came back every few rounds. That was the real issue. It was a combination. It was a perfect storm.
Our GM didn't have any idea what he was doing, and he decided that letting me play a pixie was nice, so...
To be fair, it was his first ever attempt at GMing, as far as I understand.
Oh, first-time GMs are a lot of fun to play with.
It can be, but at the same time, they can also do something that'll, like, be really...
Really derail things, or just be really bad? Like giving the
In this person's case, he decided there needed to be a boss fight, but he threw at us like a Dracolich, and he had no idea how we were going to kill it, so he had my character shapeshift into an Archon Angel and kill it.
Which, for those of you watching at home, a Draco Lich is a zombie dragon, which is extraordinarily powerful. An Archon Angel is basically an in-game boss, which is even more powerful.
Like the Archangel Michael is pretty much what I was running around as for all of 2 turns before it died.
Essentially, yes. And that's why you don't let people play a pixie bard.
Don't even lie, you like it.
I would have liked to have been able to fight the Dracolich myself, but that's a whole other argument. Uh, Also, it is important to remember what kind of story you're playing through because it can be easy to get into a situation of, well, I want to play this kind of thing because I like that, even if it doesn't make sense in the story. For instance, one of the things that I try not to honestly disbar my players from being anything specific, but it can make things really difficult. For instance, Star Wars Edge of the Empire. It takes place approximately just after the Emperor takes over. The Jedi have been labeled as traitors. The war is over with. Pretty much all of them are dead. It's illegal to even talk about the Jedi or lightsabers or anything of the sort. But in one of the expansions to Edge of the Empire, and actually in the first ever book for Edge of the Empire, it has a system for being a Jedi, for having the Force and using it. And the whole book really tells you shouldn't do this. And it's for a good reason, because being a Jedi and being found out as a Jedi or even just a Force user in general is a very good way to get yourself disappeared. But at the same time, it can also, on a more acute level and on a more frequent basis, make it really unfair in favor of the party and, in particular, that player. Because when you're going up against people that really only have kind of laser weapons and metal swords, and you whip out a lightsaber and start blasting everybody into the walls, and there's nobody else that can match that, it's not really fair to the GM or the other players. You were saying something,
I
Trevor?
remember when I insisted on being a Jedi, much to your dismay.
Yes, I told you it was much to my dismay as well.
Yeah, that's why I did it. GM tiers are what I live on.
And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. GM tiers.
They are so delicious.
So salty. So salty.
You think? Well, Dan, at least he wasn't as broken as my water dancer.
Again, that was honestly my fault as much as the systems, because the tri-stat system I've explained before on this show, I really don't like it. It's too easy to abuse, and as well, I was letting people go past the stat limit that they're supposed to be capped at because in my lack of understanding of a brand new system, I didn't realize how powerful a character is when they get past that actual limitation that they're supposed to stay at. I had no idea what I was getting myself into, or the rest of us for that
It got
matter.
to a point where my character was so much more powerful than anyone else in the party that at one point I was tasked to catch another member of the party to catch someone that they were trying to smuggle out, and I hit them, trying not to mortally wound them, and I did so much damage their arm exploded.
Yes. Yes, you did. And you also fought Jaime Lannister and were doing so much damage and rolling so high, it would have literally been impossible for him to actually stand up against you, and so I had to kind of lie to make it make sense because your character was still supposed to be a novice and Jaime Lannister is a goddamn Kingsguard.
Well, get fucked, James.
Okay, well. Also, with character creation and with trying to fit into a storyline, it's important to know what everybody else is going to be. It's important to know what kind of character they're going to play because you're supposed to be a party and the party is supposed to stay together. It's not unheard of for a campaign to end up having a bunch of, for lack of a better word, mini sessions where people go off on their own and then eventually come back. But it can derail a session because it can be real easy, especially if one person has what you as the GM think is a more interesting storyline. It can be easy to end up focusing on that for too long, and then everybody else starts sitting there bored out of their minds, wondering when they're going to get a chance to play. And also, it can mean that you go entire sessions with somebody not getting a chance to do anything, and that's not fun. Certainly not fun.
That is the least pleasant experience that you can have in D&D is when a GM obviously is preferring to mess with one person, and you're just like,
Are you there, Trevor?
oh, I'm here.
There
I
we
was
go.
just talking about how pleasant experience that you can have in this wonderful game is when it goes off on a tangent that only one player can experience, and then you have to pretend that you weren't there for any of it, and you're just sitting there like, it sucks.
Yes, it does. Another important thing is to make sure that everyone's of a similar alignment. I've talked about alignment on this show before, but it honestly goes deeper than that as far as what you define as alignment. For instance, I'm going to do another Star Wars game eventually, probably after the system that I'm doing right now, and I was talking to one particular player about the idea a long time ago. We talked about how in the Star Wars system, I wanted him because I know he would do very terrible, awful, horrible, great, wonderful, enjoyable things with it. But having him play a Sith necromancer, which is something you can definitely do in the Star Wars system, I'm going to use because there's a thing called Sith magic and it's terrifying. But when I started talking to the party about playing a Star Wars game, I realized most likely the first campaign I would want to do is a campaign of good guys going up against the bad guys and having a character in the party who is a powerful Sith Lord and a necromancer. Doesn't really that doesn't gel. You can't have that because that's not a party. Unless that
Oh,
player is
speaking of that game,
unless that player's very, very, very devoted to hiding what's going on, and then he's wasting his character in a way. Yes, Trevor?
I was gonna say, speaking of that game, we had you had brought up the Shapers at one point with me, and I was reading about it, and apparently they all function on the dark side of the Force, so that is something to keep in mind.
It's something to keep in mind, and we'll talk more about that another time. But it does play well nicely into the point I was making about how people need to be of a similar alignment to really gel as a party because it's difficult otherwise. It does kind of come down to how you play the character. I know that I've been in a Star Wars game with a character that was desperate to convince everybody else that he did not have the Force because that's more a story for the character background episode, but basically he had done something bad when he was a Jedi, and so he felt really bad about it and decided to just give it up. He kept the lightsaber around, in his house or whatever for sentimental value, and just gave up and became a smuggler. The idea being that if it ever got bad enough, he would go ahead and just whip out some magic powers for the final boss or whatever. But it doesn't work the same with a Sith Lord or with a directly evil character. It's very difficult to have somebody playing a character that is evil and yet still working with the party against the bad guy. One thing I was talking to Animus about recently actually, is the only way you can really have that is if the character who is secretly evil isn't helping the party to defeat himself or, for lack of a better word, his master, but rather just some other bad guy that's standing in his own way. But it's still kind of an odd way to do things. You were gonna say something, Trevor?
I was gonna bring up. There's a very classic example of what can go wrong if two people are varying alignments, especially in some of the earlier editions where paladins had to be lawful good.
I remember
In your
hearing
party
I remember
was
hearing
lawful
something
good.
about that.
You have a paladin, in some of the old, you had to be lawful good, and you couldn't stand by and let other things happen. I remember I was in a party at one point in which one of the other players was chaotic, was legitimately a chaotic evil character, and the paladin within the first 10 minutes of the game ended up killing this person's character because they did something that was completely against the paladin's god and all that other stuff, just because their alignment didn't match up.
I mean, they kind of had to. They were lawful good and chaotic evil or something. So it's
A really easy example of how what should and how it
that's
can happen.
exactly that's why it's very important to keep your alignments similar. Have you run into a situation like that before, Micah?
Not truly. I mean, most of our characters gelled pretty decently. Honestly, I've never had a game where both sides of the spectrum are mixed in. It's always been good characters or neutral characters or evil characters.
That's good. That's good. What about you, Balasar? You've played a few games with other people.
Yeah, I have that tiefling warlock that was a neutral evil, and I had the choice of either going along with the group or secretly at some point going to kill one of you.
That is an interesting place right there. That's strange. But that also kind of comes down to how you're playing that particular character because neutral is always strange. If you're trying to decide what your alignment is going to be and you're new to D&D, I can tell you right now, it is easier to just straight up choose lawful one or the other, lawful, choose from good or evil, really. It's a hell of a lot easier. Neutral is always hard, neutral is always strange. Even neutral good and neutral evil. It's usually better to just straight up choose lawful good or lawful evil because they're simple. It's obvious how to do them, and the most difficult character to play, I think, is true neutral.
True neutral is practically impossible to do right.
That's kind of my point.
Right.
That's kind of my point because true neutral is you only ever can do anything at any point. Any decision always has to be made of, well, does it benefit me more than anyone else? If not, then you can't do it as far as that alignment goes. Although I will say,
I
yes, Micah?
go on.
Although I will say that personally, I've never been a fan of the idea of forcing a player to take less XP or giving them any kind of other penalties or debuffs for acting out of alignment because, well, because I grew up in the 80s and so I was molded by Star Wars. The idea of falling to the dark side isn't necessarily a penalty so much as a character arc. And so acting outside of your alignment doesn't necessarily mean that you're failing as a character, but changing as a character, and that maybe that paladin that was working for Bahamut and really hard up for the faith might someday think that maybe Bahamut wasn't worth it after all and end up joining a cult to Tiamat and destroying the kind of people that he was once trying to save. It's not a failure, it's an evolution, but go ahead and make your point, Micah.
I was just going to say, neutral is more of a munchkin alignment, to be perfectly honest, because you can go and do good, but then turn around and do evil with absolutely no penalty whatsoever. You can follow the laws and then next week buck them completely, so long as it benefits you.
That's true. That's true. That is a fairly good example to give is Munchkin. Everyone's favorite card game about teaming up and then stabbing each other in the back. A little bit like poker. I also think it can be important to make sure that everyone knows ahead of time what kind of story you're going to play. It makes character creation so much more easy if I know when I start before I start making a character that we're going to be a bunch of adventurers going off to fight dragons and save the princess and make sure that the good king stays in power and that the bad king from that other country doesn't take over, or that we're working for the Jedi Order and we're trying to make sure that the Sith Empire, which already has a position of power somewhere and is starting a war to try and take over the rest of the galaxy, doesn't get to it. Or perhaps that we're part of the last of the Sith that are there and we're trying to silently and subtly undo the work of the Jedi and the Republic. It's good to know what you're getting into ahead of time. It makes creating a character a lot easier. That way you don't end up creating something terrible that doesn't work with the story you're in. And it looks like we're We still got a little bit of time. Let's check the notes. We've talked about system exploitation before. Let's talk a little more about alignments. Honestly, it's a place that has a lot of discussion that can be done. I think that it really doesn't work very well to have both ends of the spectrum represented, both good and evil, in the same party, because, like I said, the party needs to be able to work together. And if you have the
Oh,
situation like Treva said, where someone has to kill another player 10 minutes in because one's lawful good and the other's chaotic neutral, people aren't really going to have a lot of fun that way, I don't think, unless they're, well, trolls.
it's never fun to be on the receiving end of another player killing you because you're just like, man, you're way better than mine.
It can be important for storylines, though. It sometimes comes up as a storyline that one player has to kill another. But
Yeah.
I always try to make sure my group remains somewhat similar as far as alignment or intentions with their character. When I was first starting up the last Game of Thrones campaign that we did, and Trev and Belisar, you both know the kind of points I'm about to make here. I made sure with the last one that everyone was connected to the same noble house, since anyone was going to be connected to a noble house, and that even more than that, they were all in the same space. They all started in the same area. I had the story hook of how the party really ends up in one building, for lack of a better word, at the same time, which was the royal family came to Winterfell just like they did at the start of Game of Thrones. But it was very important that everyone be a part of the same noble house or connected to it in some way, or at least be from the north. That way, I don't get to start the campaign with these people over here and then have to stop and back up and do a different start for somebody else who's down in the south and then stop and start up from point one for somebody who's over on another continent somewhere. There can be a reason to do that. There is something to be said for having players start in different areas, but it comes back to the miniature sessions deal. It's all about managing who's where and how long things are going to take and how much the party can do as one.
I think a good example of having to meet people together or like get people together is probably our last Pathfinder game where one of our players we had to capture and turn into a slave just to keep him like associated with the party.
That is true. 'Cause he wanted to go off on his own and have his own adventure, apparently.
Out great.
Yeah, yeah. It's it's very important to make sure the party stays together. It really is true what they say. Don't split the party. If ever you can avoid it, I'd recommend not splitting your party. I mean, it honestly anything that I say on this show, it does kind of come down to the individual situation, who the players are, who the GM is, how good people are, at playing D&D at all, how comfortable they are with doing things a certain way. But it is best to keep the party together, and it can be a lot harder otherwise. Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and end the episode right here. For all of you that are watching it out there, I know it's a long journey, but thank you for sticking with us this far. Please leave a like, a comment, and a subscribe. If you have any stories of your own, please let me know. I would love to hear them. I'm going to check the comments section often. Also, I have a Twitter account now for this gaming discussion board. I'm going to go ahead and make sure that that's set up in the comments. It should be under Black Rose Game, under GM underscore man underscore Mikado. Like I said, it's going to be in the comments. Keep a lookout for it. Anybody want to say goodbye?
Bye everyone.
Balasar?
Play more games.
Micah?
Happy adventuring.
And as I have started liking to say every time, the dice giveth and the dice taketh away. Good night.